In-ear monitor systems have gotten more and more popular for a while now, and for good reason. You get to hear the same mix no matter where you are on stage. It saves on your hearing because you don't have to keep turning up your wedge mix to compete with the drummer. And if you have an in-ear monitor rack, you can save your mix and have the same mix as you go from show to show. But if you look online, there's so many different options for in-ear monitor systems. Some are cheap, some are expensive, there's stereo or mono. There's all sorts of different earbud options. Do you need accessories like an antenna combiner? How do you know which in-ear monitor system is right for you? My name is Scott Ewell, and I've teamed up with Sweetwater today to bring you the ultimate guide to in-ear monitor systems for musicians. I'm a full-time live musician, and I personally play basically every single show with in-ear monitors. Unless if I'm doing like a simple, small, acoustic coffee shop type gig, I pretty much gig with in-ear monitors at every other show. I'm also a content creator, and I've reviewed and used a ton of different in-ear monitor systems over the last couple of years, and I'm going to give you my personal recommendations for in-ear monitors based on my experience. There is no piece of gear that's right for every single musician out there. Every musician has their own preferences. However, in my opinion, one of the best gear investments that a musician can make is going into a good in-ear monitor system. All of the products I talk about in this video will be available on Sweetwater. There will be links available down in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, if you want to keep it very, very simple, you actually can get wired in-ear monitor solutions instead of a wireless in-ear monitor system. This is the Behringer P2. It's a very popular choice for a wired in-ear monitor solution. It's battery powered with 2 AAA batteries. You plug in your in-ear monitor feed here at the bottom, either with XLR or 1/4 inch. So for example, out of this Allen & Heath mixer, I'm coming out of aux 4 and sending this in-ear monitor mix direct to the P2. Headphones plug in here at the top, and you have volume control right here. It also has a clip so that you can attach it to your belt or a stand or something like that. So you obviously won't be wireless if you have a system like this, but that's okay if you're a stationary musician like a drummer or a keyboard player or a shy bass player or a solo performer and you're not planning to move around the stage a whole lot. You absolutely can do this wired. And the P2 is only like $40. There is also the PM1. That is a passive one. That doesn't require any batteries or any power, so it's completely passive. You might get into a situation where you can't turn it up enough depending on your stage setup, but it's also like $12 if you just want to get it as a backup option as well. But this is about as simple as it gets and also as affordable as it gets. And also, even if you plan to go wireless, it might be worth having a couple of these with you just in case something goes wrong with your wireless. I always have some of these with me just in case something goes wrong. I know most of you are saying, I want to go wireless, I don't want to be wired. I understand, that's the way I gig as well. So let's go over some of the wireless options. This can be a little bit intimidating, but I'm going to try to leave this as simple as possible, and I'm going to help you understand how to decide which one is best for you. But first, we just need to understand that wireless needs to communicate on a frequency. Instead of using a cable, the transmitter and the receiver communicate with a wireless frequency. This could be 540.250 megahertz, 906.800 megahertz, 5.8 gigahertz. For this part of the video, the numbers aren't really important right now. Just understand that the transmitter and the receiver need to be set to the same frequency in order for them to work. Now, if you set it to a frequency that is bad or is taken by something else is using either wireless or something else that is causing interference on that channel, that's how you're going to start to have dropouts and your in-ear monitors aren't going to work. You might get static in your ears, you might get dropouts, you might get less range. You want to set it to a frequency that is open and available. That's the most important thing with wireless gear. So as you're looking for wireless products, the more options that you have to find a clear signal, the more likely it is that your wireless is going to work wherever you play. And what's tricky about this is that the frequencies that are available are going to change depending on where you're performing and as you go from venue to venue. If you're getting in-ear monitors for like a house of worship or a venue or something like that, and you're not changing locations, the available frequencies aren't going to change that much. But especially as you go from venue to venue, or especially if you're touring and going from city to city or state to state, the available frequencies are definitely going to vary. This is where it gets confusing. I've been in a real situation where my $1,000 in-ear monitor systems did not work, but I had like a $50 wireless guitar system that did work at this one location. Because this is true about any wireless system, in-ear monitors, microphones, guitar wireless, and stuff like that. Does that mean that my $1,000 in-ear monitor system is awful and this $50 wireless guitar system is amazing? No, it just meant that those were the frequencies that were available at that location that I was gigging at. My in-ear monitors operated between 470 and 516 megahertz. And then that guitar wireless, I think, operated between 910 and 918 megahertz or something like that. All of those frequencies for my in-ear monitors were already taken by something else. We were performing near the airport where there's a lot of stuff going on. But then that cheap guitar system, those frequencies were open. And this is why if you look at reviews for wireless products, some people will say, this thing is amazing, it's flawless, it never cuts out on me, I love it. And other people will say, I can't find a single clear channel no matter what I do, this thing is garbage. Most likely when someone is unhappy with their in-ear monitor system, and when they specifically say that they can't find a clear frequency no matter what they set it to, usually it's because they bought the wrong system for their area. I know this is a lot of information, but this can really determine if you're going to be happy with your wireless in-ear monitor system. So how do you ensure that you have the best results possible? If you stay in your hometown, either as a fixed location or you mostly just play in your hometown, you just want to make sure that you get the correct frequency band for the in-ear monitors. I'm going to explain that here in a minute, but you have to find the correct band. Now, if you're planning to travel or tour, you really want to have a wider number of frequencies to choose from. If you're feeling a little intimidated, I think it'll make more sense as I go over these options that I'm going to give you for wireless products. All of these products will be available on Sweetwater, and my most affordable recommendation is the X5 U45. So the U45 is currently listed around $260. It's super portable. Both the transmitter and the receiver have a built-in battery and charges with USB-C. You do have 6 different frequencies to choose from to set a clear channel, but what's great about this is that it actually has scanning. If you just hold this button, it'll actually do a scan and tell you which frequency you should set it to. That's super valuable instead of just guessing to see if you're on a clear frequency or not. And then I would set the transmitter to the same frequency and they're going to work. It also transmits in 5.8 gigahertz, which is really nice. A lot of these other models will transmit in 2.4 gigahertz, which generally is pretty crowded. But again, it all depends on where you're performing. You can take the transmitter, plug that into wherever you're getting your in-ear monitor mix from, and you're good to go. Although for best practices, you do want to keep this at least 6 to 10 feet away from a Wi-Fi router. This mixer has a Wi-Fi router built into it, so I would not plug this in directly like this. And I'm going to use an XLR cable to move it away from the mixer. But for $260, it's a great system. Just realize that it has a total of 6 frequencies to choose from. So it is possible that you will get to a show and those frequencies will not be available for you to use. That's part of why this is so affordable. So over the years of using different wireless products and trying to tell people about wireless products, I know that some people get really stressed out when they hear the possibility that their wireless might not work. If that's you, I will just remind you that stuff goes wrong at shows all the time. Cables, guitars, amps, pedals, speakers, kick pedals. Just plan to have a backup option, especially if you go with some of these more affordable models. So have a backup option, and that's also why I recommend to have these wired solutions as a backup option, or spend the money to get some of the higher end systems, and they're going to have way more frequency options to choose from, which means it's more likely that your wireless in-ear monitor systems are going to work as you go from show to show. As we look at the next tier up, there's so many different options, and using this, we need to look at the frequency bands of in-ear monitor systems. We're going to look at ones from Shure, from Sennheiser, from Galaxy Audio, and from Samson. But all of this will apply to any in-ear monitor system that you look into. So remember, the X5 U45 only had 6 different frequency options. Here, with all of these products, we need to look at the range or the bandwidth that the wireless products operate in. So here's an example. We're going to look at the Sennheiser XSW IEM. The A band will operate between 476 and 500 megahertz. The B band will operate between 572 and 596 megahertz. Within those ranges, there's hundreds of different frequency options of where you can find a clear signal. It's not just 6 individual frequencies, there's a whole range that you have in order to find a clear signal. Now, the Sennheiser XSW IEM system, it has a range, or a bandwidth as it's often called, of 24 megahertz. Both of them have a range that is 24 megahertz wide. Make sense? Let's look at some other ones. So the Shure PSM 300 is a very popular model. G20 operates from 488 to 512 megahertz. H20 operates from 518 to 542 megahertz. J13 operates from 566 to 590 megahertz. They also have a tuning bandwidth of 24 megahertz. Let's look at a Galaxy Audio one. Those are generally a bit cheaper. This one operates between 470 and 492 megahertz, so 22 megahertz range. Makes sense? So no matter which system you're looking at, even if it's not one that I'm going over in this video, look at the tuning bandwidth. How wide is the range to find a clear signal? Now, that brings me to my personal recommendation at this price point. This one is the Samson Ear Amp. This one actually does not have band options. I wish that it did have that, but it only operates from 470 to 502 megahertz. Now that is a tuning bandwidth of 32 megahertz, and at the price point of 550, that's actually a pretty good deal. I have gigged with these, and I was definitely happy with them. This system does have the ability to scan for the clearest channel. That's extremely helpful. You don't have to just guess. You can do a scan and set it to the correct channel. One of the things that I also like about this model is that it comes with the rack mount kit, which is important because most of the time the antenna port is on the back. A big mistake that I see is people will leave the antenna in the back and put it in a rack. You don't want to do that. You want to bring the antenna to the front so that it has clear line of sight. Do not have just the antenna buried in the back of a rack. You're supposed to bring them to the front and connect them to these spots right here. But what I really like about this model, and I've only really ever seen this on the Samsung model, is it also has an antenna port here in the front. So they make that extremely easy to bring the antenna to the front. Those are just two bonus things that I like about this model. Some alternatives to this, the Shure PSM 300 and the Sennheiser XSW IEM or the G4 IEM. Those are very popular models, some of the most popular in-ear monitor models. Those are great. I have gigged with those. There are also the ones by Galaxy Audio, which I don't have a whole lot of experience with, to be honest. But I personally really like the Samsung one. But whichever system you decide, how do you know which band that you should get? This is where the Shure Frequency Finder comes into play. This is a super helpful tool to help you be able to decide which wireless system you should get. So we're going to go to the Shure Frequency Finder website. It's a free tool, and we're going to search with the PSM 300 series because it's a very popular model. I'm in Colorado. Let's search for Denver. It says to go with the H20 band and to avoid the other ones. So I should go with the H20 band if I'm staying in Denver. If I went with one of the other models, I probably would not have a very good time with my wireless in-ear monitor systems. What if I'm playing in Dallas, Texas? It says to go with the G20 band, and it says just to go with that one. What if I'm performing in Phoenix, Arizona? In that case, it says to go with the J13 band. So do you see why it's important to have more of a frequency bandwidth, especially if you're touring? If you're just performing in Dallas and you plan to just stay in Dallas, you should just go with the G20 band and you should be okay. This doesn't guarantee there can be other things that can cause interference, but this is just a good starting spot for you. But if you're going from city to city, in Denver you need one, in Dallas you need another one, and in Phoenix you need another one. So if you're touring, I would not go with one of these options, and I would go with the next tier up. If you plan to stay mostly in your hometown, just make sure you find the correct band. Not all of them are going to say never use any of the other ones. Let's look at like Cheyenne, Wyoming. If you look at that one, it gives you options and you can use basically any of them. So it just depends on where you're performing at. That's why the Shure Frequency Finder is really helpful. But there is one more thing I wanted to show you. Let's do the same thing with the PSM 300 series. We're going to set this up in Chicago. It actually says none of them will work in Chicago. Chicago is known for being a very difficult spot for wireless gear to work in. So it says actually you should not even use the PSM 300 series in there. Let's go up to their next tier up, the PSM 900 model, which is more expensive, but it does have a wider tuning bandwidth. Now you can find that one of those will work. So if you're in Chicago, I wouldn't even recommend going with the PSM 300s. I would find one that has a larger tuning bandwidth. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because I showed this on the Shure Frequency Finder website. Shure is the only company that has this. Sennheiser also has one, but they don't have it for their wireless in-ear monitor system. It's like for their digital wireless guitar and microphone systems. And since the Samsung model is my main recommendation at this price point, here's kind of a workaround that I found. If you go to the Shure Frequency Finder website and you set it to the Shure PSM 900, see if the G6 band is available in your area. G6 band operates from 470 to 506 megahertz. So there's another 4 megahertz more than the Samsung series. So it's close, but that's the best that I could find for something like this. If you do that search and you find 0 frequencies in your area, I would recommend finding something different besides the Samsung model. But if you do that search and you do find that there are frequencies available in your area, then it's definitely worth going with that Samsung model. Again, I know this is a little bit complicated, lots of numbers going on here, but this honestly can determine if you're going to be happy with your wireless in-ear monitor system or not. To summarize this, do you see the value of having more frequency options? If you stay in your hometown, just make sure that you find the correct band for the area that you're performing at. And if you're touring, I would recommend going with this next tier model that I'm about to recommend to you. And you're going to see why with my next recommendation. All right, that was a lot of information. What if you just don't even want to worry about that? You don't have to worry about getting the right bands for where you're going. This brings me to the main system that I do recommend to most people to get. This is the Audio-Technica ATW 3255. This wireless in-ear monitor system operates between 470 and 608 megahertz. That's a massive 138 megahertz of tuning bandwidth that you have in order to find a clear signal. As of the time of shooting, it's listed at 850. Insane deal to have that wide of a frequency tuning bandwidth to find a clear signal. And with that, you don't even have to worry about bands. Remember how the other models had those different bands that operated between a different range? You don't even have to worry about that with the Audio-Technica system because it just operates in the entire UHF legal frequency in the United States. If you plan to travel to a different country, you'll have to look up the laws in other countries. But for the United States, we can use 470 to 608 megahertz, and the Audio Technica system operates in that entire frequency bandwidth. That's a huge jump in the frequency bandwidth at a very good price point. One of the other things that I really like about this model is that when you do a scan and then you send that to the transmitter, it's actually going to give you a graph of how the RF environment looks. So you get a visual to see how open or how challenging the RF environment is going to be. And I've used this to actually set up other wireless gear as well. Definitely a huge plus on top of the massive tuning bandwidth with this model. So especially if you're touring, I highly recommend to go with a model like this. Even if you mostly stay in your home state, it is also nice just to have no stress about it and just know that you'll always be able to find a clear frequency with this system. And that's why that's the main recommendation that I have. And I will just say, if you think 850 is a lot, there's only 3 other models that I know that span this wide of a frequency tuning bandwidth. There's the Shure Axient Digital PSM, the Sennheiser Spectera system, and then the Lectrosonics M2. These are the prices of those products. Most of them you can't even get as like a single unit. The most affordable product at this next tier is Lectrosonics M2, which is a fantastic system. You get 2 stereo in a half-U rack, but I mean, the price jump for that is a lot more expensive. If you can afford any of those higher end models, those are even better because they're a fully digital system, so you can actually use more wireless systems all at once. So if your budget calls for that, I definitely recommend those. But for the value for the money at $850, the Audio Technica was just such a great system. I've gigged with it for multiple years. It works fantastic and it sounds great. So that's the main system that I recommend if you're going to be doing touring. If you're doing really high channel counts of wireless, then you want to look into the Lectrosonics, the Shure Axient Digital PSM, and the Sennheiser Spectera. But that brings me to the point about tone. Now, this is something that I'm sure a lot of people are saying. They're like, I don't even care about all this frequency stuff, which FYI you should. Again, I really think that's going to determine if you're happy with your wireless or not. But a lot of people are going, I just want to know which one sounds best. The most important factor for determining if your in-ear monitors are going to sound good, besides obviously how good your mix is the earbuds themselves. The earbuds are going to determine probably 95% of the quality of your mix. Almost all the systems sound great. It's mostly the earbuds themselves that will determine the quality of your in-ear monitor mix. So if you look on Sweetwater, there's all sorts of different options from cheap to high end. The most important spec to look at for in-ear monitors is the number of drivers. So the number of drivers is just going to separate, the low, mids, and highs. Kind of like with the PA system, how you have a subwoofer that handles the low end, and then you have the tweeters that handles the high end. If you get an in-ear monitor earbud that only has one driver, that one driver is going to handle all of your lows, your mids, and your highs. Whereas if you get a triple driver in your monitor system, which is generally my personal recommendation for earbuds, then you're going to have separation in the lows, mids, and highs. So I personally recommend 3 drivers, but it's all up to you and your budget. Especially if you're a singer and you aren't super picky on your tone and you just mostly need to hear your pitch, you can probably get away with a single driver one. But especially for like guitar players and bass players and stuff like that, I do recommend going with triple drivers if you can. The main recommendations that I have, so for the single driver one, I really like the Sennheiser IE100 single driver model. For a dual driver, I like the X5 T9. That's a nice dual driver in your monitor system. And then for a triple driver one, I really like the Ultimate Ears UE350. Although I will give an alternate that the Shure SE triple driver model is also a very popular model as well. You can go up as high as like 8 drivers, or Ultimate Ears even has a 21 driver in your monitor. But as long as you get the 3, that's where you get the separation of low, mids, and highs, and that's where it starts to sound better in my opinion. One other important tip about this, pun intended, change those tips for your in-ear monitor earbuds. Make sure that they have a good fit. If it's not fitting with your ears, if you're not getting a good seal with it and they're not fitting into your ears, that's going to drastically change the tone and how much they pop out, of course, as well. But getting a good fit is really important with those in-ear monitors. I got hired to play with a band, and one of the singers, she would always complain how her earbuds would always pop out. She would actually use like earmuffs when we were at rehearsals to keep them from popping out. And we found that she actually needed to use the extra small earbud tips in order to get them to stay in her ears. That was the trick. She needed to use the super small size. Those are for just the individual like universal tip ones. If you go with custom molds, that's an interesting process where you have to go to like an audiologist and they put a bunch of goop in your ear and they take an impression of your ears and then they make in-ear monitors specifically designed to fit with your earbuds. Those are fantastic if you can get those, of course. Those are going to be better than any universal tip ones. However, they will also be more expensive. I'm just trying to give you some options. If you go with universal tip ones, don't be afraid to change the tip to make sure that it fits in your ears. That's definitely very important. But if you can get custom molds, those are going to be even better, even though they will be a little bit more expensive. And speaking of expensive, that brings me to the next option of mono versus stereo in your monitors. Which one is right for you? Most people are going to go, well, stereo, obviously, right? Stereo is better. It truly does depend. Now, if you're like a guitar player and you've programmed your patches in stereo with a very specific ping pong delay and stereo reverbs and you want to hear that stereo image in your ears, then yes, you're going to want to go with stereo. However, I will just mention that if you do decide to go with stereo, stereo is going to be much more expensive. The reason why is because you will need a bigger mixer. You will need a big enough mixer that has enough aux outputs for stereo outputs, because every stereo in your monitor mix needs to have 2 outputs. So for example, on this Allen & Heath mixer, I can only do 3 stereo in your monitor mixes because I have 6 aux outputs. I can do 3 stereo or 6 mono in your monitor systems. You will also need to buy more systems because there's a trick that I'm going to show you in a minute of how you can save more money and not have to buy as much stuff if you go with mono. And the other thing is, if you go with stereo, you very likely are also going to need an antenna combiner, which is also something I'm going to go over here in a little bit. But you will need a bigger mixer, you're going to need to spend money on more systems, and you're likely going to need an antenna combiner. So if you do plan to go with stereo, just plan that it is going to be more expensive. As my personal recommendation, stereo is great. I do mostly gig with stereo in-ear monitors now, not every time. Sometimes I have to go mono, but most of the time I do get to go stereo. However, I gigged with mono for like 8 years before switching over to stereo. If I just stayed on mono, I would be okay. If you do decide to go stereo, just make sure that you actually utilize the panning. I've seen this happen so many times where someone will get a stereo in-ear monitor mix and they go, oh, it sounds so much better, but they utilize 0 panning in their in-ear monitors. There's no point in using stereo if you don't utilize the panning in order to be able to hear a little bit more of all the instruments on stage. Stereo is great. Just make sure you actually utilize the panning if you use stereo, and plan for it to be more expensive. However, there's a really nice trick that you can use where if you have one stereo transmitter, you can actually send 2 separate mixes to 2 separate musicians, and they will each have their own mono in-ear monitor mix. Here's how you do that. So first on the transmitter, just make sure that that is set to stereo. Make sure the transmitter is set to stereo. And then on each of the body packs, you're going to make sure that the body packs are set to mono. So on the Audio-Technica one, that's set to mono balance. And then on one of these, you're going to pan all the way to the left, which means you're just going to listen to what's plugged into the left input. And then on your second pack, you're going to do the same thing. Make sure the audio mode is set to mono. And then on this one, you're going to pan all the way to the right. So transmitters are set to stereo, then the receivers are both set to mono, one panned all the way to the left, one panned all the way to the right. Then on the back of your transmitter, you see you have the left and right inputs. You're going to plug those into your mixer. So aux output 3 of this mixer is going to go into the left, and then aux output 4 is going to plug in to the right input here. So now I have 2 separate independent mono in-ear monitor mixes. Whichever one is panned all the way to the left, we'll listen to just what's plugged into the left input, and then whichever one is panned to the right, we'll only listen to what is plugged into the right input. 1 transmitter, 2 receivers, 2 separate independent mono in-ear monitor mixes. I get this question every single time I mention how to do this. Does that mean I'm only going to hear sound in one earbud? No, since it's set to mono, if you set your body packs to mono, you will hear the sound in both ears. This does work on the Samson model as well, because you can see I can set my pack to mono, and then I can pan 1 pack to the left and then 1 pack to the right. This will work if your transmitter transmits in stereo, and then your receivers can be set to mono, and then you can pan left or right. So this will work with the Shure PSM 300s, the Sennheiser XSW, or the EW-IEM, but it will not work with the X5 model that I mentioned earlier, because that one only has 1 plug. Although X5 is working on a stereo model right now, but the U45 is not possible to do this with. But that is a great way to save money. 1 transmitter to 2 receivers to get 2 mono mixes. Great way to save on rack space, save on money. It definitely is a great option if you're good with mono. So that brings me to the next topic. Do you need an in-ear monitor combiner? So if you have these wireless in a rack, because a lot of people will have, an in-ear monitor rack with their in-ear monitor mixer. And this is what's great about that 1 stereo to 2 mono trick, is that means that you need less wireless systems in your rack. Now, one of the worst things that you can do is actually have an antenna farm with just a ton of antennas around each other. That's a great way to get less range or interference or dropouts with your wireless products. You shouldn't do this with any wireless system. Some people will say if you have two antennas in a rack, you need to combine them together. Honestly, that is best practice. You will get the best results out of that. It depends on how big of the stages you're performing on. I have gotten away with doing that. Generally, what I say is when you have 4 antennas in a rack, that's where you want to start combining them to a single antenna. When you do this with like wireless microphones, that's called a distribution system. So you do have to do 2 separate things if you do use wireless mics, wireless guitar, and also in-ear monitors. I'm just talking about in-ear monitors. Those are what you need a combiner for. So if you go with that 1 stereo to 2 mono trick, it depends on the size of your band, of course. If you're an 11-piece funk band, you're going to have to figure this out. But if you're a 4-piece band or a 5-piece band, your drummer is wired, and then you have 2 transmitters and 4 receivers, and each musician gets a mono mix. That's just 2 wireless systems in a rack. You don't really need a combiner for that. You could get a passive one like this one by RF Venue. That's a great way to combine it to a single antenna. But you can only use passive ones if you plan to just use it with 2 in-ear monitor systems. If you use more than that, then you need an active combiner. And again, that's why stereo is more expensive, because as soon as you have 3 or more, you're going to need to use an active combiner in order to get them combined to a single antenna. Now, sure, Sennheiser and RF Venue all have antenna combiners. They're all great options, and they're also brand agnostic. You can plug in, sure, Sennheiser, Audio-Technica, whatever, into those combiners. If you get the Sennheiser combiner, it doesn't only work with the Sennheiser products. So that is definitely a great option. I will just let you know that there is another option if you don't have your in-ear monitors in a rack. There is a wedding band that I'll fill in for sometimes, and they are a 6-piece band. And instead of having them all in a rack, what they do is they actually space out their wireless on the stage. So every musician is in charge of bringing their in-ears, and then they space it out on the stage. That keeps the antennas from being all bunched up together, causing that antenna farm in a rack. So if each musician spaces it out on the stage, that is also an option to get best results from your wireless products. Just make sure you avoid antenna farms and get a combiner if you need to. If you're combining 2 of them, you can do it with a passive combiner. If you're doing it with 3 or more, you will need an active combiner. I know the video's already gone long enough, but here's 2 more pieces of advice that I have for common mistakes that I see with wireless gear. First of all, do a scan before the show. My main recommendations all have a way to scan. Just because your wireless was good at the last venue that you played doesn't mean it's going to be available at this venue. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard, well, my wireless just worked at the last venue. Yes, but the frequencies that were available there are different than the spot you're performing. Do a scan when you get to a new venue. One of the first things that I do when I get to a gig is just make sure that I scan to make sure that I'm on the right frequency. And then second, the most important thing is line of sight is always best with your wireless systems. The antennas on your body pack should be able to see the antennas on the transmitter as best as possible. Of course, as you're moving around stage, you're going to block the signal a little bit, but some people will put like their in-ear monitor rack at front of house, and then they run it during sound check and everything works fine. And then when everyone shows up, that's a bunch of people blocking the line of sight from the transmitter to the receiver, and then your wireless doesn't work. Line of sight is always best with wireless in-ear monitor solutions. And that's another reason why a lot of people generally tend to use those paddle or directional antennas, because you can bring those up. If you have like in-ear monitors at front of house, you want to bring those antennas up. That way the bodies watching the show are not going to block that signal. Line of sight is always best with any wireless system. So I hope this video helped you guys out on your in-ear monitor journey. It might be a lot to go over, but I really think that a lot of this information is going to help you get the best results out of your wireless gear, especially the stuff about frequency bands and frequency bandwidth and stuff like that. I know that was probably the most complicated part of the video, but I really think that's going to determine if you're going to be happy with your wireless in-ear monitors or if you're not going to be happy with your wireless in-ear monitors. Again, many thanks to Sweetwater for inviting me to be part of this. All the products that I talked about will be available on Sweetwater. Thank you guys again for watching, and I hope I've given you enough information so that you enjoy using in-ear monitors as much as I do.